About tie-ins. Sorry about the noise in the background. I'm currently in a rehearsal. But talking about tie-ins are what I would say is the most essential part about being a head electrician. Aside from leading the crews, aside from advancing the shows, this is the part that is solely your responsibility, and that people are going to be expecting you to perform. And today I'm going to be talking about the two different types of tie-ins with network and also with power. And these are the two things that you're going to be expected to do as a head electrician. So I should, give a disclaimer that you are going to have issues at first. If you're inexperienced with doing tie-ins, it's most likely, from show to show that you're going to, mess some things up, or you're not going to be understanding why things aren't communicating correctly. Things may, go wrong, but it's important to just stay calm in those scenarios, to understand where the error is and work on fixing it, especially if it's an issue on the show side. Make sure that you're asking them all the right questions about, what they're outputting and how it's communicating with the system as a whole. So I just thought that was an important disclaimer to say right off the bat that it can be a tricky process. It can be very complicated, but I'm going to try and give a pretty good overview about how to diagnose a system and how to tie in a system and what to really look for when you're doing those sort of things. So first I'm going to talk about network, two different types of tie-ins that they're going to come in, and based on the type of show, you will see what type of tie-ins you need to do. One of them is dry lines, aka copper is another one that you might hear, or DMX, because that's all it is. It's just DMX connections from their rig, their rack, to the rig as a whole, to the system. So you can see here, this is a picture of stage right. This is the tie-ins that we have here for Wicked, and you can see that this is just a ACN gateway, and I have assigned the universes in which they are communicating to. So they're only connected to 3 universes here, and you can see that it's labeled here on the bottom to tell them which one it is. Because it's important to understand that with dryline connections, it doesn't really matter what the universes is, as long as you understand what the output in the house is. So for them, they can say on their console that front of house, like the specials for the ASL signers, it can be, universe 3, universe 4, whatever. It can be whatever on their system, but it has to match up. It has to connect to what is in our front of house. So our front of house is universe 1. And so on the rack here, it'll say universe 1. And they just need to understand that if they plug in their cable here, their DMX cable, and all the copper wires are, in the correct orientation, hopefully they're not using weird cables, that it'll communicate to universe 1. So that's just a very important thing to understand. Just like with any other copper cables, as long as the wires are correct, it'll be correct on our end. And just understanding that you need to make sure you know which universe is being output in the house or on the rig over stage. And it doesn't really matter what is on their console end, as long as the cables are connected in the correct orientation. So that's what I have here. I have house, stage right, and stage left. All right, so that's just a brief overview. Hopefully that's pretty clear. I hope I described that correctly. You'll understand it once you do it. It's really just, understanding just the basic connections. Don't overthink it. It's not super complicated. But what can be a little super complicated is the lighting network. sACN or network connections through an RJ45 connection. And this is the part that can get a little bit tricky, but this is the other way of doing it, is say for a rock show that is going to be using our rep plot and maybe some stuff in the front of house. They're connecting to a lot of different universes. And so in that instance, that's when you'd want to do a, sACN network connection. So, talking about sACN network connections, when you're outputting to a lot of different universes where you don't want to run a single cable for every single universe you're talking to, that's when you'd want to do this. A lot of the Broadway shows, I have not worked on a single Broadway show that has come in and wanted to talk to our rig as a whole, because it can get messy, and you'll understand that if you ever ask a Broadway show if they want to tie in through network, they're probably going to say, no, we don't want to do that. and that's when you want to do dry lines, because they just want to output to one specific universe. They don't want to mess with IP addresses. They don't want all the house to freak out. They don't want the house to talk to their system either. So it's very important that you understand what kind of show is coming in and be prepared for which scenario you're able to do. There's not a lot of prep going into it, but just a heads up. You want to make sure that you're asking the right questions and understand how to do it. So, another picture I have here, if you're on stage, we have these 4-port gateways on either side of the stage. That's where we can run our dry lines, usually using stage right. But if you're also doing, if you're connecting another gateway, such as like a 2-port, you can connect it here with a lighting network RJ45 port here with some of our dimmer outputs as well. Or you can also tie them into the network just like, any other connection. Anything that says lighting network with a number underneath it, that is what you're going to want to plug into, whether it's a gateway, whether it's their consoles. That is how you connect them into the system. It's all an unmanaged system, so you don't have to go through any firewalls or anything. You don't have to tie them in the back. It's all on unmanaged switches, which will connect them into the rig as a whole. So, not a whole lot of guesswork there. And that goes for any port in the house, from the rock pit to the lighting booth, the Broadway dock, or anything backstage or on the jump. All of these guys are connected in the same way. Okay, talking more about sACN and how to connect people into the network. I think it's, a good starting place to understand how our consoles are hooked up into the network. You can see here, this is a photo I took of just the console. Sorry, it's a bad quality photo, but it gives you some important information here. If you're connecting another EOS console, and you want to have the consoles talk to each other either in a client mode or in a mirror mode, whatever the case, you're going to have to be in the same build version. So it's going to have to be version 3.2.5. That's currently what we're running. It's a bit of an outdated version, so it's important to understand that before connecting other EOS systems, or, such as in my case, with my, laptop here that's also running EOS. I'm going to have to be on the same version right now. I don't believe I am. Right now I'm not. So I'd have to downgrade my version in order to talk to the system using this console over sACN. Another console, it doesn't really matter. But if I want to do multi-console stuff, that's what you have to do. But you can also see down here, this is a more important part, is seeing what the port address is on our console, 10.101.91.101. And so what that tells you is when you're connecting, let's say a Grand MA, for instance, they have, let's see here. I want to give you the correct information here. What you need to understand about IP addressing is that there's two parts of a network IP. It's the network part and the host part. And so you can see here that this part, whenever you're tying in, it has to be the same. So in our instance, in here, it has to be 10.101. That's what the IP address needs to start with. And then whatever is after it can be whatever. But it has to make sure that it's not overlapping with anything else in the network. And I'm going to show you how to do that right now, show you what to look for. Go back into this. And if you click on, I believe it's About System, you can see everything that is talking in there. You can see all the IP addresses in them. So you can go down there. I can show you here, About System. Right now I'm offline, so obviously there's nothing else on there. But it'll give you a whole list of everything that's in the system, at least that's connected to our console that my console can see. And it will list all the IP addresses on there. That can be a lot of guesswork. That could be annoying if you're trying to go through all these and see which one's available. But you can see that all these guys start with 10.101, and then they have some variation after it, such as the dimmer racks. The dimmer racks are in 101, the consoles in 9.3, and then whatever. But you got to make sure that these first two parts, 10.101, is the same across it, or else it's not going to talk, and you're going to freak out, and you're going to wonder why the hell the system's not talking. Okay. So yeah, that's just a little, discrepancy about that. That's how you understand that. Next thing to understand is sACN output viewer. If you're trying to understand how they are talking in a system and what is being controlled by what, you can go into tab 37 here. And you can see this is sACN output viewer. And you can see what's talking. Right now, I'm not on anything, so obviously you can't see anything there. But say, I type in 998. And you can see these guys right here, 998, 266, whatever, these addresses here that are patched into channel 998, these guys would be outputting, such as in my picture here. You can see, I should probably refer to this one more, but that shows you how to get to it. And this tells you what everything's being controlled by. So you can see all these guys are highlighted here, and you can see what the sources are. Right now we have the RPU, which is the remote processing unit. This is it's the main part of the system. It's the main board that everything talks to, that outputs everything. You can also see here we have stage left and stage right. Those are our gateways that are outputting. Not outputting, they're inputting. They're taking data in. Right now, nothing is taking anything in except you can see here the RPU is sending out to these guys because right now in the rehearsal, I have the works on and I have those guys turned on. So you can see this guy outputting 255, 0 to 255. 255 means it's at full, if you understand DMX in that sense. Through connected to channel 998. It has a label here, upstage works, the intensity. It's being sent by the RPU, and you can see what IP address is sending it. And if you go into here, you can actually hit about, and it'll show you all this information, and you can control it in here. You can control everything about it in here, and you can understand how it's connected into the system. This is a good place to diagnose issues. If you don't understand, if things are turned on for some reason that you don't understand, you can come into here and see what's sending it. There was one show that came in here, and they left a bunch of shit on, and so you had to come into here and to unpark it, or you had to go to dimmer racks and just turn them off, turn them back on, because it had a bunch of ghost data going into it. So this is a good place to go if you're trying to diagnose stuff in your system. sACN viewer in your console. Okay, once you got an understanding of that, here's some very important stuff that I like to keep in mind. Is for touring shows, I like to tell them to keep their sACN priority at 132. I don't know, I believe the paradigm system here is at 100. You can also see in our console that I showed earlier, the priority of this console is also 100. So these guys have a higher priority. You do not want the touring system to be higher, because if their sACN is higher and they have stuff patched into, say, Universe 1, and they connect to our system, everything in the house is going to turn off because they're trumping our stuff, and it's going to be a mess, and you're not going to understand why everything just turned off. You're going to try and unplug them. Everything's still going to be off because of a bunch of ghost data. So that's just very important to keep in mind when you're doing that. Make sure they have a lower sACN priority. Make sure that you're not sending anything out to the rig when they're trying to control the rig, so that they can control it. That's just a general rule of thumb. When I have a show come in and I'm tying them in through data, through sACN, I tell them to set their priority to 132. And I also tell them to set their network, their IP address or IPv4 address, to 10.101.91.200. You can see back in the, this guy that I had pulled up, all right, my apologies. It can go through 0.1 to 0.200. That's the range that it can be in. I just tell them to go into 200 because that is the end of it, and I know that there's nothing in that area. So that's what I tell them to go into. And so none of their stuff is going to be crossing with anything else in the system. This is the IP that I tell them to connect to. Subnet should be the same always, 255.255.0.0. That's the same across basically all ETC systems. And most ETC systems start with 10.101. So, something to keep in mind if you're working with ETC systems. This is what I give them, basically. And they put all that stuff into their console, and they're able to connect to the system, usually with no problems. There are some hiccups that you may encounter, such as in the case with Avatar. No, I mean, they weren't Avatar at the time. They were Naruto. They were doing a show of Naruto going around, and we connected them into the system, and they had stuff. Their stuff on stage was starting in Universe 101, And I didn't know that they were going to be starting in 101 because our lights in the house, like we have a star map on the ceiling, started at Universe 101. So when they were sending stuff out to their lights, our stuff in the house started freaking out because it was getting a bunch of values. So I had to tell them to move it to another starting address where we weren't getting crosstalk in between our systems with the house lights and with the stuff on stage. So you may encounter stuff like that. Obviously they don't know what is in our house. They don't know which universes we're using. So it's just very important to understand what we have in our system, which universes we're using, and make sure there's no crosstalk in between our systems. All right, enough network talk. I'm kind of tired of talking about network. Talking about power a little bit. Mostly what you're going to be doing with power, besides just using 15 amp circuits, making sure that they're not using our blue lights back there because they're all connected in series. And if wardrobe's using it and have like a hot iron on it, they're going to trip the circuit. Besides that, you're going to be responsible for tying in the company switches, the 400 amps, 200 amps, the 100 amps. That's what you're going to be responsible for doing. And so you can see here, this is what we have set up on stage right. For Wicked, they have a 400 amp service for their support truss. This is one of the 2 electrics that they have. You can see we wrote down when we tied them in. And you can see here on the bottom, we have cam lock connections for this guy. We can also do bare wire. If you open this hatch here, you connect it with some lugs. And you can also see here that we have sling wrapped around in a choke connected to probably a pipe back here. I can't really see it. Just lifting up some of the strain relief on the cables, making sure that if there was any trippage or anything was getting pulled on there, that there's some strain relief on those connections because you are pumping 400 amps. And if any of those connections were able to get loose, you can have a fire hazard there. Speaking of fire hazards, it's very important to understand how you connect them up. So we have a nifty little label on here that tells you how to connect it. First thing it says on there, obviously, is that it should be made by qualified personnel. That's going to be the head electrician for the county or yourself. The head electrician representing IATSE Local 99. So connections should be made in the following order. Equipment with the grounding connector, G, here your ground, then your neutral, and then the ungrounding conductors, A, B, C. You can see here our ABC is black, red, and blue. You may see it different in other systems where the colors may be swapped. You can also see that you may encounter systems where it's brown, orange, and yellow, boy. In those cases, if you don't really know what you're doing, don't do it because those are 240 volt circuits, and you can get really hurt if you don't know what you're doing with those systems and have a qualified person do that. But those are the other ones that you're going to be seeing. You want to stay away from the boy if you don't know what you're doing. But for these 120 volts, if you know what you're doing, if you're qualified in that sense where you know the order in which to put them on, take them off, I should say here, disconnect in reverse order. So do the powered circuits, then the neutral, then the ground when disconnecting these guys. That's what you should be doing. So stay away from 240 volt circuits if you don't know what you're doing. Sorry about the interruption. I had someone walk in on me. But, that's what happens when you get recording during rehearsals and during work time. Anyways, going back into this, it's very important that you make sure that you have strain relief on it, make sure that you connect it in the correct order, and make sure that you disconnect it in the correct order. In this case, left to right, and then right to left. And then you can also see that, when you're all lit up, that it'll say that it's all outputting the 3 poles because it's a 3-phase connection here, as you can read, and it is properly grounded. The reason why you want to make sure that you strain relief this is because these are not locking connections. Surprisingly, with cam locks, they do not have locking connections. It's all tension in there. It's just rubber to rubber. And you want to make sure that if you're doing a lot of connections, maybe want to bring some gloves because they will rip up your hands. They will destroy your hands when you're connecting it because these are big fucking cables and it's just a bunch of rubber on there. You want to make sure these are nice and tight in there. You want to make sure that if you can, get a buddy to double check your connections. Just give them a nice little twist. Make sure that they're nice and tight. You really do not want these falling out, especially when this is live. And I think that's all I really want to say about this. make sure that you have a good little bit of cable on the bottom here. You don't want a bunch of cable floating. I never like cable floating for 400 amps. Sometimes I do have to run feeder over doors in order to make sure that we don't have cable ramps on the bottom where people can be, tripping on themselves when they're entering and exiting, especially during the shows. So, in that case, I will put feeder in the sky. I don't want connections made in the sky because I don't want any tension on those cables at all. I really do not want anything to come undone during a show or when these breakers are live. That's all I'm going to say about that. Besides that, just normal, everyday 15 amps, making sure that people have lights for their work boxes, make sure the cables are run cleanly, and make sure that people aren't overloading circuits with a bunch of, heavy machinery and such. Anyways, continuing on, I just wanted to go over these sheets here. These are sheets that are hung up here in the booth. They give a little bit of an overview talking about what services we have, what data we have. Some other things that are important to say is that our front of house snake length is about 300 feet. So you want to make sure that if you're advancing the show, tell them, hey, you need about 300 feet of cable, 275 to 300 feet. It's about 250. But, if you're on stage right and you're all the way upstage, going through the plenum, going down that pipe to front of house, you may get a little tight on your cables. So I always say about 300 feet. And we do also have, like in the case with now with Wicked, they don't have a front of house snake to their console in the front of house. So we have two Ethercon cables that ends up on stage right and here in the front of house that they can just connect right into. So that's a permanent install in our house so that we have a connection that can connect those two up if they don't have a snake that reaches that far, or if they don't have a snake at all, such as in the case with Wicked. There's some also information here talking about connecting Avo, Onyx, Kamsys. Those are some consoles that aren't typically in here, and you may find that people on those consoles may not be the most familiar with networking. So just some information there to help you tie them in if they're not very experienced on their own boards. And I think that's all I really want to say about that. I can't really think about anything else to say when it comes to tying people in. Just understand that you may, encounter mistakes. Things may turn off unexpectedly if you're, kind of doing this for the first time. Just be sure that you are, willing to talk with people, willing to make mistakes, and willing to own up when you make a mistake. Anyways, that's all I'm going to talk about with this. Hopefully this is helpful. I'm going to try and cut it down and make it as clear as possible. I may interject with some stuff here and there. But, appreciate you tuning in, and good luck. Thank you.